Picture this. It's late 2025, and the government of Meghalaya pulls off a huge shakeup. We're talking 8 out of 12 ministers replaced, seemingly overnight. The official line? To strengthen governance. But did it really work? Today, we're going to peel back the layers on this major political move to answer one simple question. Was this a genuine effort to make things better, or was it all just political theater?
And that question right there, that's really the core of our whole investigation. It's a fantastic question because it cuts right through the official story and forces us to look at what actually happened on the ground. It's not about promises, it's about results. So, let's try and find the answer together.
Okay, so here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we'll look at the shakeup itself, what actually happened. Then, we'll dive into what the government promised versus the political reality behind the scenes. After that comes the moment of truth, the 3-month verdict. And finally, we'll zoom out to see why these kinds of reshuffles often fail to deliver.
All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, the government shakeup. And believe me, this was no small thing. Observers were calling it a major political exercise for a very good reason.
So the date you need to remember is September 15th, 2025. This is the day the chief minister decided to fundamentally overhaul his entire government. It was one of the biggest moves of his whole term. And get this, the number is 8. 8 ministers were asked to step down to make way for new faces. Now, in a cabinet of just 12, that is a staggering 2/3 of the entire government just gone in a single day.
Wow. And you can really see the scale of that change here. I mean, look at that big blue slice. Those are all the new people. Only a tiny handful, just 4 people, including the chief minister himself, kept their jobs. This wasn't just shuffling the deck. It was like they threw the old deck out and got a brand new one.
Okay, so you have to ask, right? Why would any government make such a huge, drastic change? Well, let's move on to the official story, the promise they presented to the public.
And on paper, the reasons they gave sounded pretty good, didn't they? They were talking about resetting governance, being more inclusive, representing different regions, giving special attention to places like Raboy and the West Garo Hills. It all sounds like a really thoughtful, strategic plan for reform. That was the story they were selling.
But, there's always the official story. And then there's what's really going on. So let's peel back a layer here and look beyond those public statements. What was the real driver behind these decisions? And this quote from the chief minister himself, well, it's a huge giveaway. Listen to the language. We have 50+ MLAs. We must give importance to regional aspirations. See that? The focus suddenly shifts from performance and public service to managing the political needs of over 50 members of the Legislative Assembly. It's all about keeping a big, messy coalition happy.
And that leads us to this really important idea, political management. What does it mean? Well, it's basically when the main goal isn't to improve your life, but to keep political allies happy and make sure the whole coalition doesn't fall apart. The motivation is political, not practical. So you see the clash, right? On one hand, the promise was all about resetting governance for the people. But the reality, as suggested by the CM's own words, was about managing the coalition. This wasn't about finding the most qualified person for the job, it was about finding the person who best fit the political puzzle. Which brings up a really sharp question. If this whole thing was about fixing what was broken, then why on earth weren't the ministers in charge of struggling sectors like education and health shown the door? I mean, everyone knew there were huge ongoing problems there. Yet both ministers stayed put. The most likely answer? They were just too politically powerful to remove, no matter how they were performing. Okay, so that brings us to the big test. The promises were made, the new faces were in, so what happened next? Let's look at the verdict, 3 months down the line.
Right. This is the moment of truth. After all that political drama, after all the new ministers were sworn in, did anything actually change for the people of Meghalaya? Did those big, nagging problems finally start getting fixed?
Let's just run through the facts, shall we? In education, teacher pay that had been pending since 2018 was still pending. In health, those critical drug shortages and ambulance issues, unchanged. How about water and power? Well, the situation actually got worse. We saw major shutdowns after the reshuffle. And law and order? The same problems just kept going. The data doesn't lie. The core failures didn't change at all.
So what's the bottom line here? It's pretty simple, actually. What changed? 8 faces in the cabinet photos. What didn't change? The policy failures, the poor service delivery, the lack of accountability. All of that stayed exactly the same.
And here's the thing. What happened in Meghalaya isn't some isolated incident. It's a classic example of a pattern we see all over. So let's zoom out for a second and look at the bigger picture. The universal reasons why these big reshuffles so often fall flat.
Well, there's a pretty clear playbook for why this happens. First, people get picked for political reasons, not because they're the best person for the job. Second, there's no real penalty for doing a bad job. Third, the broken systems underneath it all don't actually get fixed. And finally, you have something called learning curve loss. The new minister spends months just trying to figure out what's going on, and all that time, real progress stalls.
So what do you end up with? You get the appearance of change. The headlines, the new photos, the announcements, but what you don't get is the actual substance of reform.
And honestly, this quote just says it all, doesn't it? The reshuffle changed faces, not outcomes. That is the entire story in one powerful sentence. Despite this massive political exercise, the end result for the public was the same. So that leaves us with one last question to think about. When political theater takes the place of effective governance, when the appearance of change is chosen over the hard work of real reform, who is it that really pays the price in the end?